Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Lacuna Coil called Delirium. You know, it hasn't really been easy to be a fan of Lacuna Coil these days. And the sad thing is that most of the fan base have seemed to be in agreement with me, because starting off with Shallow Life in 2009, the gothic metal band has become a less interesting shadow of what they were. I'll be honest and say that when I got into them when I was a teenager, I would never consider Lacuna Coil one of my favorite metal bands, but throughout the late 90s and most of the 2000s, they were a solid group that had potent melodies, a couple great albums, and a cohesive sound. And even if their writing has always been kinda spotty at points, there was a lot to like about those albums like Comalaise and Karma Code, and then producer Don Gilmore showed up. With a more commercial-leaning mix, Shallow Life was a pivot towards the mainstream that was too little, too late in 2009, and only served to alienate a fair chunk of the fans. They made a modest return with 2012's Dark Adrenaline, but by the time they released Broken Crown Halo in 2014, having booted out Gilmore for Jay Baumgartner, it became apparent that the problem wasn't so much the production, but by-the-numbers composition and songwriting. And yes, that is even with the admission that Die and Rise remains one of the best songs of 2014, hands down, for taking a unique point of view and twisting it into a really kick-ass metal song. Real love that track. So, you could argue that Lacuna Coil needed a dramatic shakeup, and by all accounts, they got it. Both their guitarist and the drummer retired from the band, which led to their bassist Marco Codizolati picking up guitar work along with new arrival Diego Cavalotti, along with hiring drummer Ryan Folden. It rapidly became clear that Lacuna Coil was heading into a very new direction, and with lead-off single The House of Shame, well, they certainly got there, with chugging, borderline metalcore riffs and a much heavier focus on the growl male vocals. And look, I'm not really a metalcore fan, but I was willing to give this a try, especially considering that Zelati was handling all the production work in-house. So, did it work? Well, not really, no. And I hate saying that because you can tell that Lacuna Coil were really trying to snap out of a funk with the sound, push into a brand new direction for the group. And while they definitely did that, it does not work for me whatsoever. Not only did they not fix the problems that followed off of Broken Crown Halo, they somehow exacerbated them and added new issues to boot. As such, while Delirium by Lacuna Coil is at least cohesive in embracing the new sound, it's not a sound that flatters this group whatsoever, and it might just be their least listenable album to date, because at least Shallow Life, it had some hooks that I liked, but this, not really, not at all. So how the hell did this happen? Well, let me start off by talking about the elements that actually still kind of work. The first and most obvious being Christina Scabia's vocals. She's always been a solid and expressive singer, and while she's got a little bit less to do on this album, her vocals do stand out when she gets a little bit more presence in the mix. And yet, just like Nightwish's last album, it doesn't look like anyone knows how to properly balance her more ethereal tones against the much thicker, more compressed riffs, or give her multi-tracking that she needs to match Andrea Farrow's louder, more prominent howls. And it just strikes me as a really poor choice, as she's by far the more interesting singer than Farrow's one-dimensional rage. And look, I get adding growl vocals for contrast against the cleaner singing. Epica does that all the time. But you need to give the clean vocals more actual presence, some multi-tracking maybe, especially going to make the riffs that much heavier. And piling fuzzes on both singers doesn't make any of it sound more visceral, so much as it feels sloppily fixed in post. To go back to why Die and Rise actually worked on Broken Crown Halo, it allowed the singers to play off each other at equal volumes. Whereas here, most of the time it feels like Scabia is just getting drowned out, and it's not helped by the production. And look, as I said earlier, I'm not the biggest fan of metalcore, or even deathcore touches you see in the blast beat drumming or the chunky down-tuned riffs, but I understand if people are into it, and I can appreciate the sound a little bit more. But what I do see is a near complete abandonment of what gave Lacuna Coil's albums unique presence before. The melancholic mood and the atmosphere that at least tried for more memorable melodies. The House of Shame, Downfall, and My Demons, they get kind of close, giving hints of ghostly symphonic elements around the edges, or at least a little bit more keyboards and balancing out the vocals a little better. But the second we get to Broken Things, it becomes very clear the actual melody is the least important element to these songs. Sure, that familiar guitar tone is there, but it's behind a cloud of cymbals on the verses, and then you have this incredibly shrill layer on the chorus that seems like a stab at glitchy electronic elements that completely misfires. It really sounded tinny and terrible. And the poor synth choices unfortunately carry over from Broken Crown Halo, or just the introduction of terrible effects to supplement these songs. The plaintive squeals on the hook of the title track along the shrill synth over the verses, that gummy chiptune that keeps popping up on Blood, Tears, Dust that somehow bleeds over the hook, an increasingly clumsy groove there, the greasy synths drizzle all over Ghosts in the Mist, or the fuzz over My Demons try and desperately make the song sound more visceral, or those god-awful child vocals that open up Take Me Home that might have some potent bass texture, but then pairs it with one of the most shoddily assembled and choppy grooves I've heard in a hook all year. And yes, Lacuna Coil, I heard Scalar Tale back when Nightwish wrote it back in 2011, but difference there, the mix actually had depth and deeper punch. It sounded epic, where very few of the riffs, they actually have that power. There's a lot of compression and occasionally a good groove, but there are too many points where the compression feels unsupported on the guitars and not having the body to really build momentum in the mix. Sure, there are points where the rickety, half-assembled grooves and the texture kind of works. The bass and guitar textures in the verses of You Love Me Cause I Hate You, it's pretty potent, especially against some of the dirtier percussion, but I'm left appreciating the guest guitar solos on songs like Downfall with Miles Kennedy of Alter Bridge, or on Claustrophobia from Alessandro Laporta, far more because they at least add some melody and they stand out before the riffs just break into these deadened synths back in this gutless breakdown. And while I'm nitpicking here, the drum production on this album is incredibly frustrating, especially with that slapping kick drum pattern that in no way complements the riffs or is anywhere having that much thickness to it. At least managed to fix the cymbal production so it comes through a little bit clearer. Arguably clearer than any guitar melody though, because it sure as hell gets more presence, and that's never good to de-emphasize your melody even further here. But you know what? That's all production. If you're more a metalcore, deathcore fan, you can probably get behind it despite all my gripes. But where things get a lot less excusable is in the writing, which reportedly is delving into the horrors we experience in everyday life and the constant struggle to deal with them. And to say this album plays fast and loose with that theme would be understating it, because this record does not come close to getting specific and contains some of the most badly structured writing I've heard in the Lacuna Coil album to date. The worst probably being the flat-out embarrassing hooks on Take Me Home or on Broken Things. But you know what? Moving past that, the more I dig into the lyrics, the more I find that Lacuna Coil might be their own worst enemy on facing the horrors of the world. As right from the very start, this is a record loaded with antisocial accusations and aimless rage. Hell, you could even argue from songs like Delirium that the protagonist of this album is dealing with far more personal demons that are far darker than anything else outside. Or on moments like Downfall or maybe Ghosts in the Mist, they do a decent job capturing how said demons can seem insurmountable, even with help from the outside. The problem becomes that instead of actually dealing with those inner demons, or maybe just embracing them and going nuts, Lacuna Coil lashes out at everybody else, and this record gets pretty damn exasperating and pretty damn juvenile. Mostly because tracks like My Demons and Claustrophobia have absolutely no subtlety, or even a lot of nuance. I'll admit I was a little bit intrigued by that BDSM imagery on You Love Me Cause I Hate You, for at least trying to for some sort of metaphor, but the kink is so sloppily realized that I just can't even get invested or interested in the song. But what's more frustrating is that Lacuna Coil seems to be regressing in their writing, being back to the blunt, choppy statements that might be above average for deathcore, but a painful step down compared to Lacuna Coil's best. I've heard Carmelis, I've heard Karma Code, they're better than this! And that is the thing. If this was a band releasing their first album, I might be a bit more forgiving. Hell, in comparison to most of the deathcore I've heard, this might just be poetic. But this is Lacuna Coil's 8th album, and even making the excuse that this is practically a new group, even they have gone out of the way to emphasize that the core of the songwriting hasn't changed. Well, guess what? Where Broken Crown Halo showed them running out of ideas, Delirium has them hitting the bottom of the barrel and going for a sound that's measurably less melodic and interesting that does nothing to emphasize the group's strengths. This is a record that gave me a splitting headache with every single listen, which is why it's getting a light 4 out of 10 and no recommendation from me. And while I won't fault a band for trying new things, and there are some moments that kind of showed some spark, this definitely didn't work. Sorry, but I'd skip this. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I can't imagine how this review would be controversial, but I get the poll up there, so if you all want to tell me how I'm wrong, I'd be happy to hear it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.